NHL trade deadline today. Wayne Simmonds is gone, man. He is a Nashville Predator. Ryan Hartman and a draft pick in return, conditional pick. Why'd they make the deal? What was the thought process behind it? And more. Kevin Durso from 97.3 ESPN.com joins us now to kind of, as the dust has settled, Kevin, can you wrap your head around why Chuck Fletcher felt that this was the best deal for Wayne Simmonds?
I think it was the way the market kind of dictated itself this afternoon. It became a really slow afternoon. There wasn't a lot of activity because I think a lot of people were waiting for the biggest shoe to drop. The biggest shoe was Mark Stone from Ottawa. And when a deal finally went down at about 2:45, it left everybody else kind of scrambling on the market to try to see what they could get, see who was left to be able to negotiate with and get a deal done. I always thought Nashville was a target for Wayne Simmonds. I felt like he's a fit there. There's a lot of things that factor into that. I think he's a great fit for their power play in terms of just the ability that he has on the power play to be a net front presence. Their power play is ranked last in the league, so they desperately need help there. And at the same time, physicality. It's the level of physical play that Wayne Simmonds brings that could make a big difference for Nashville. From the Flyers' end, this really came down to getting something in return for Wayne Simmonds. It's kind of tough to look at the trade and go, it feels a little underwhelming to some people, and I can understand that. But at the same time, you have to look at what Wayne Simmonds is in the here and now, and he's not the same player he was last year or 2 years ago, and the injuries that he's had over the course of the last 2 years really kind of did him in a little bit. So in the end, he wasn't going to be worth a first-round talent. And in a sense, he got you a first-round pick because Ryan Hartman was a former first-round pick and a guy who's got some good upside to his game.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people would look and say, was this the best deal? In fact, some people think they could have done better with Nashville. I've seen people texting in wondering if they could have got something more from just Nashville. But this seems like the classic, hey, we had to move on from Simmonds or he was going to walk. Let's get a guy who maybe needs another change of scenery, who's young and has some upside.
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan Hartman's 24 years old. He's under club control as a restricted free agent, and he's not going to hit you hard in the salary cap spot here. You know, he's making less than $1 million this year. He might break $1 million next year, but it wouldn't be much more than that. So it's a guy who's a low-risk kind of guy, brings the same kind of edge to his game a little bit. Obviously he's going to be a much smaller guy than Wayne Simmonds, but he's got that physical edge, and he's got a grind to his game. He's also really good on the penalty kill, and he's a guy who's been utilized by Nashville on the penalty kill, so he could probably help the penalty kill in Philadelphia for sure.
Talk with Kevin Durso here. The message, obviously, you and I were talking Saturday night. They won the game. They stayed within striking distance. But this deal is not made with the thought of the playoffs, obviously. This is a deal that is made for moving forward here, correct?
It would appear that way. I think the message of the deal is, look, they've put themselves in a position to still make a little bit of a run here. And if the team constructed as it is following the trade deadline can do that, then that's great. But the expectation was that if Wayne Simmonds wasn't going to re-sign with the team in some way, you have to get what you can get. And time had run out, and the previous two games kind of indicated all that you needed to know, and that's this team's got no margin for error. And with no margin for error, the best thing to do is get what you can get for some players.
Kevin, what do you think the Flyers' mindset is or game plan for Hart for the rest of the season? And do you agree with how they've been using him and handling him and how they potentially will use and handle him for the remainder of the season?
I think the game plan for him moving forward is to come in and be the starter for this team when he's healthy. It's a matter of he's the future of this team, and the goal is to get him as much experience as possible. You know, in saying that, I think obviously the situation with Saturday's game turned into a bit of a mess because first it was a hockey decision to not play him. Then it became an injury, so that's why he didn't play. It would have been a lot easier to just start off and say he's injured, that's why he's not playing in your biggest game of the season against your biggest rival outdoors in front of 70,000 people. That being said, I thought that he shouldn't have started that game on Thursday in Montreal regardless. I thought it was a great spot to showcase Brian Elliott, to give teams a look at him before the trade deadline if there was going to be anything to come of that. And you could essentially have rested Carter Hart for that big game on Saturday. Now, all's well that ends well in a game that you win, and Brian Elliott was excellent in that game on Saturday, the third goal to Malkin aside. But I think the plan for Carter Hart needs to be a smart one moving forward. And that's, you can't overwork him even at 20. You have to be very mindful of how much you're playing him. The back-to-backs and things like that, I understand where they were coming from at the beginning. Cam Talbot couldn't make it into town after the trade happened, so you were left with Carter Hart and Mike McKenna, who's basically been an AHL lifer kind of, for 2 games over the weekend against Detroit the previous weekend that could have defined your season, and the Flyers go out, they win both of them. They're still in a playoff race after that. But beyond that, as things started to fall apart a little bit, and you can be mindful with Carter Hart a little bit, you can't be starting him in the back-to-backs. You can't be starting him 4 games in 6 days. You have to be very mindful about his development, and you need to give him an opportunity to not wear down like he possibly did here with this injury.
What's the expectations for the team for the rest of the season? I mean, is it just, let's just see what happens? Is it, let's make a playoff push? If they collapse and, lose 6 of 8 or whatever it may be, like, is there any scenario that would be concerning to you, or any scenario that is needed for this to be deemed a success?
I don't know if there's really one that is needed to be deemed a success. I do think there's one that could cause some worry, and that's if this team becomes completely not able to compete in these games, and to have some competitive level to their game. I liked what I saw in the third period of that Pittsburgh game on Saturday, just because you're still in it, you're still thinking about the playoffs. It's going to be nearly impossible to still make up the deficit that's left. They've cut it in half in a matter of about 5 or 6 weeks, but it's still going to be near impossible to make that up completely. That being said, remaining competitive and still winning a few games here and there, and focusing on being a plus 500 team from here on out, it was really a goal here. It should be to remain competitive, to see what Carter Hart has when he's able to come back, to see what some of these players have too. You've got an opportunity to really showcase some young guys here. Nolan Patrick played the last game on the top line. Be great to see him play in an elevated role, see where his game is at after 2 years, see what Phil Myers has, however long he stays up, to see Travis Sanheim continue to play on the top pairing. It's kind of a trial period here. And if that happens to lead to a miraculous playoff run, that's great. The worst thing that could happen is for this to be a total collapse down the stretch, because that would kind of indicate that the guys that are up here now aren't getting it done, and you've got a lot more to worry about than what just happened at the trade deadline. You're going to have a very busy offseason.
Kevin Durso covers the Flyers. Now, Kevin, what about, okay, you trade Simmonds. Who might benefit from this? Like, who gets more ice time, gets a more prominent role?
Well, it's going to pull James Van Riemsdyk off the 4th line and probably put him back on the 3rd line. And I actually think that the 3rd line, if Ryan Hartman does play on that 3rd line, I think a 3rd line of James Van Riemsdyk, Scott Laughton, and Ryan Hartman could be a really good line. Laughton's got some edge to his game. Hartman's got that edge as well. So they can be 2 guys who can be active on the forecheck, getting involved in the offensive zone and trying to set up plays. And you've got a guy who's able to put the puck in the net in JVR. That being said, there's not many other players that really get the benefit of it. Your top 2 lines are still the same, so they get the same kind of role as they did before. I think it's a great opportunity for Ryan Hartman to get adjusted to this opportunity and to this system and get a chance to play a little bit more. He was kind of getting lost in Nashville with all the depth that they had previously. He was a 4th line kind of guy for them, and that gives you very limited playing time, and it takes away from his offensive ability. He's got the upside to score up to 20 goals in a season. He had 19 in his rookie season with Chicago, then gets traded halfway through his 2nd year to Nashville, and the role completely changed. So this is an opportunity for him specifically to come in here and try to embrace the new role, be a 3rd-line guy, and maybe be a great depth piece for this team moving forward.
Yeah, and tomorrow night, Buffalo. That win, you and I were there, and people were exiting. They come back, they win, and we had said if they lost that game, you can really count them out. But even at 7 points, it's a long shot. But that win was almost essential on Saturday night. And then you and I had talked about it on Facebook Live about, Columbus. They kind of went for it. Some teams in front of you, they made their moves over the weekend. And the Flyers didn't make a move to try to get to the playoffs. They made a move to try to get better moving forward. And Chuck Fletcher said today, they just didn't really see any intention that they were going to sign Wayne Simmonds, so better to get something from. So, that being said, Buffalo tomorrow night, this game is paramount. They're a point ahead you in the standings. You got to at least leapfrog over another team. So if you win tomorrow, you will be over one more team. You start chipping away at some of these teams, it starts to get more interesting. But tomorrow night, very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I go back to something that Scott Gordon said a few weeks back where it was, we're not worried about the teams that are all the way at the top, the team that you're chasing in the standings, whether that's Columbus or Pittsburgh or Carolina. It's changing by the day, it seems. But you're worried about the next team in front of you. And he even cracked a joke at the end of his press conference that day and said, the next team in front of us is the team in first place. So very much so, you're looking at this game as the opportunity to leapfrog a team that's in front of you. That's the first step to getting anywhere in this race. So you have to look at it that way. Buffalo has made some improvements. They've done some things that are going to keep them alive in the playoff race.
And I would think Buffalo, who hasn't made the playoffs in a long time, is really trying to go for it.
Yeah, definitely. And Buffalo's last game on Saturday, they come out and they play Washington very well. So and Washington's obviously, as the defending champions, they're no slouch of a team. That's a marker for them for sure. So this is a game where the Flyers have to be on it from the start. This is, you can't have that lapse like they did the first period against Pittsburgh, even where, they came out of that game on Saturday tied 1-1 after the first period, but they got outplayed in the first period. You can't have those slow starts. You can't have those lapses in between, and you really got to play your game and be right on top of it, because this is, if you still want to believe that you have a shot at the playoffs, even despite what happened at the trade deadline today, you better be playing 60-minute games, and that's what they've got to do on Tuesday.
Yeah, well, their next, Buffalo, Tuesday, Thursday at Columbus. Both of those teams are directly ahead of you, and then New Jersey is behind you. So the next 3 games, you really have to take care of business. You got the Islanders, who are the top team in the Metro, then Washington, then the Islanders again. So these 3, followed by 3 toughies coming up. So it'll be interesting to see, plus Carter Hart. We'll keep you up to date on that. Follow Kevin Durso at Kevin_Durso on Twitter for all the latest on the Flyers. Tomorrow night, we have Flyers and Sabres for you on 97.3 ESPN. Kevin, good to see you, pal.
Thanks, Mike.